Good morning on this Sunday, November 10th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Governor Brian Kemp announces his plans for a limited Medicaid expansion. The AJC reports former Mayor Kasim Reed's wife was driving a city-owned vehicle when she was involved in a crash. Lots of questions on this one. And the U.S. Supreme Court appoints a new expert judge in the latest round of water wars between Florida and Georgia. Well, Theron and Janelle are off. Corey Roof, Phil, Kathy Woolard, and Alexis are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Governor Brian Kemp unveils his health care plan for low-income Georgians. It's called Georgia Pathways. Critics say they're disappointed because hundreds of thousands of Georgians will still be uninsured without a full Medicaid expansion.
Too many hard-working Georgians struggle to afford any type of health insurance.
Governor Brian Kemp says his plan offers those struggling Georgians a path to health insurance. Recipients of the limited Medicaid expansion would need to work, volunteer, or be enrolled in school or job training in order to qualify. Kemp's plan targets those who make too little to afford health insurance and don't qualify for Medicaid. For an individual, that's about $12,000 a year. The state would enroll them in Medicaid or cover their share of their employer-sponsored insurance, whichever is more cost-effective. Applicants would be required to pay a small premium based on their income.
Unfortunately, the recent Medicaid proposal from the state has missed the mark on providing the best option that would cover more Georgians.
There will be public comment on the health care waivers over the next couple of weeks. The Trump administration has to give final sign-off. Now, Phil, I want to start with you because 400,000 Georgians, I guess, could be eligible for this program. The governor's office says they expect about 50,000 Georgians to apply for this if it's approved. Is this, do you feel, getting at the root of the problem? Or is this really giving Democrats something to run on for next year?
No, Democrats, if they're smart, ought not to oppose this because, as we're saying, we're helping low-income people. This is a model for the rest of the country. The Trump administration is looking at it. Other states are looking at this. Other states are going to be doing these waivers. And one thing that I do like, and I don't know if it'd be held up in the courts, but there are qualifications about people that having to work doing this. So the more people we can cover, the better. Now, the liberal numbers don't work when it comes to having everybody covered. The math doesn't work. So this is a first good step.
Kathy, I know you're sitting on the edge of your seat.
I am on the edge of my seat. This is a high-risk Hail Mary from the governor. This is not going to work out. Much more conservative plans have been rejected by the federal government. I don't think at the end of the day this is even going to get approved. But here's the problem. If you make $12,000 a year or less, what kind of premium are you going to be able to pay for? You're still trying to figure out how you get a house over your head. The work requirement's not going to work. If you're worried about suburban women, think about suburban women who are caretaking for children, for parents, for disabled relatives or other kind of people who have a work requirement before they can get insurance, but yet they are fully engaged in supporting their household. They won't qualify for this. 50,000 people over 5 years, 10,000 people a year. You've got rural hospitals who are closing who are not going to get newly insured people who can pay for the services that they need to have requirements. This is a failure from the get-go. But what is worse is it's sort of a Trumpian sort of like, here we are, here we go, doing our health insurance, and nobody's going to get the kind of coverage that is needed to get the kind of outcomes that the governor's own study said, that we're number one in maternal death, the top of the list for HIV transmission, high blood pressure, diabetes. Nothing in this plan addresses any of the things that the governor's own study said need to be addressed.
But Kathy, before I get to both of you, let me ask you this, because we have seen the federal government pull back on other funding issues. I mean, take transportation, for example. So what if there was a full Medicaid expansion and then the federal government says, oh, you know what, we can't fund it? And that's what the Republicans are saying. What happens then? And the state is left, having to fill the gap there.
Right. Well, so when we've waited like 8 years with people saying, what if they pull back? They haven't pulled back yet. And at the end of the day...
You don't want to answer that question.
No, I do want to answer the question.
The taxpayers will be stuck with it.
The taxpayers are going to be stuck with anything happens, right? If people aren't insured, taxpayers are stuck with covering health care for people who can't pay, for
Corey,
supporting
weigh in
safety
on
nets.
this. Weigh in.
Additionally, we know that it is the goal of some of the Democrats who are running for president to have Medicare for all, right? So the expansion of Medicaid right now, at what point does it stop? So you could have the government stop paying for it, but you also could have a call to further expand it. But I think what's missing here is the fact that last week, Governor Kemp unveiled the first part of the overhaul, his plan to overhaul Georgia's healthcare system, and that included a subsidy to the industry so that it can expand
welfare
coverage into the lower incomes, though, while reducing premiums for those in the middle class. So I think that the two taken together go a long way to close the insurance gap.
And we should remind viewers, Corey, you are a Republican, so Alexis, you weigh in.
Well, I'm not a Republican or a Democrat, but I will say that I just think that this is a farce, as Kathy sort of suggested. And it's
Certainly suggested.
So you don't think it'll help a single person? That's ridiculous.
It may help, but look at it's just built in for failure. And then to require the work requirement and all that, it's been ruled out by several other states by the courts. And I just think the Medicaid expansion is the way to go. They're going to use federal money to subsidize the insurance companies who are making money hand over fist already. And then the people will pay the premium. So they should use that money to expand Medicaid.
Okay, we're going to move on because President Donald Trump was in town this week courting African-American voters. Corey, weigh in on this. He had, I guess, 8% is what they're saying African-American voters vote for him last go around. How successful can he be?
Well, I'm less interested in that question and more interested in pointing out the fact that, African Americans have to begin flexing both muscles. I mean, we're the only people group in America that does not have a significant number of people advocating for us on both sides of the aisle. And our system is designed for that. And so I think this is good, whether you want to go to the rally or not, and whether it expands African American participation in the Republican Party or not. It's good for us to show the full wingspan of political influence that we have in Black America.
Alexis?
Well, I don't disagree with what Corey's saying. However, I do think right now there has been a reversal of the two parties. The party of Lincoln is the party of Trump now, and they're two different parties. And historically, blacks voted Republican in the South because of the Dixiecrats. The Democrats were the segregationists. And I just think that, we're at a place where we're going to vote in our own self-interest.
Well, you can't have it both ways. The left always mocks the Trump and the Republicans for not reaching out to blacks, and then when Trump does reach out to blacks, you mock him and attack him again. So, Donald Trump isn't going to win with the political left, but in key electoral college states, to your point, Corey, where there is outreach, 2 or 3% hike in the African-American vote can mean victory in some of these state races, because after all, the election is a 50-state race.
That is not going to offset the suburban white women that are leaving in droves.
You have no proof of that.
Well, let's talk about Virginia and Kentucky for a minute.
Yep.
Well, I want to.
It was an off year, number one.
Last word on this, because we are Georgia, and people like us to talk about Georgia.
Okay, well, I do want to point out that blacks have always thought that our issues were too narrow to build consensus across both parties. And what we've learned under Trump is whether it's opportunity zones or the commitment to eliminate HIV in the next 10 years, which affects the African American community, whether it's auto portability that puts $800 billion worth of black wealth back in 401ks, what we found is that we can actually have progress no matter who's involved. Look at Lyndon Johnson. He said a lot of racist things and was considered one of the most racist modern presidents, but he passed the most significant civil rights legislation. So I think this is good.
All right, well, coming up, an agency investigation asks who authorized Kasim Reed's wife to drive a city vehicle. A city vehicle she crashed. Video shows she allegedly ran a red light, and yes, taxpayers picked up the tab for the damages.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
The AJC reports that Sarah Elizabeth Langford Reed, the wife of former Mayor Kasim Reed, was driving a city vehicle when she crashed it at 10th and Peachtree in Midtown a couple years ago, the couple's daughter in the back seat. The mayor's security detail came to the scene, took the report, and there were so many inconsistencies in that report. Taxpayers picked up the $16,000 tab for damages to the city car. No one knows who paid for the damages to the other car. And Kathy, you were president of the City Council. City Council President Felicia Moore is telling the former mayor, bring your checkbook again down to City Hall to pay for this. What do you think of this? I mean, this is outrageous.
It is outrageous, and the hits just kind of keep on coming, right? Every time, you know, it's been years now that this guy's been out of office, but we still are hearing of the excesses of that administration. It's clear she shouldn't have been driving a city car. You don't even have to really think very hard to know that that's a wrong thing to do. When he brings that checkbook, though, it needs to be a personal checkbook. It needs to not be a checkbook connected back to other accounts at the city that he's been using in the past.
And Phil, according to the story, I mean, a few weeks prior to that, she was driving that city-owned vehicle with a suspended license.
Right. Again, I agree with Kathy, the points you've made. It's an outrage. If you're a taxpayer of the city of Atlanta, you just shake your head again. It's another blatant abuse of public office under Kasim Reed. And of course, his brother Tracy was involved in all sorts of abuse of power. He was actually in the contracting office. Thank God he was gotten rid of. Again, I'm glad, again, these records came out just as a kind of a footnote with all the documents that are going to the U.S. Attorney's Office on the ongoing federal corruption probe. So we'll probably see more of this type of abuse of office.
All right, well, this past week, I know, we got to move on to these voting machines. This past Tuesday, not necessarily with the casting of ballots that there were problems, but with the check-in process. Corey, weigh in here because there are pilot programs for a reason.
Yes, that's right. And so as somebody who works with clients that's rolling out new technology, new software, this is actually a good problem to have. So 4 of the 6 counties that was piloting the new systems experienced some glitches, some delays. And so now we have the benefit before the big March presidential primary election to go back and fix the bugs and to work on process improvements and to get some relevant training.
But Alexis, some Democrats are saying, you know, this is why we need to go back to the hand-marked ballots.
Well, yeah, that is a good suggestion. However, I am concerned that that could be a problem too, as we remember those hanging chads from that 2000 election. But Phil, I'm concerned too. Phil did a test and he voted twice.
That's right.
And it went through twice.
Yeah, that's right. There's 3 stages to this voting process, and then the 3rd stage, you actually are casting your ballot, and then it comes back to you. And then what I did is I slipped it in again. Now they assure me, we have to watch them, Alexis. They assure me that would never happen.
Well, Alexis definitely doesn't want you voting twice.
I don't want her voting 5 times.
Will we be ready on March 24th? That's the question. Well, voters in DeKalb County snubbed their noses at the DeKalb Ethics Reform Code on the ballot Tuesday. And Kathy, you know, opponents made sure that their message was heard on that issue.
Yeah, I think everybody kind of breathed a sigh of relief on that, and I think the flaws were obvious. I talked to Representative Matthew Wilson from Brookhaven today. He's preparing legislation just to fix the part about who gets to appoint people. I think leaving off the extras is an important thing to do, and fix what the courts identified as wrong is what DeKalb ought to be moving toward and fixing it. The next election, assuming everybody can vote, because the machines will be fixed.
And that was one of the worst phrased ballot questions too. I mean, can we do plain English on these things? But I'm glad it failed too.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
I voted on that issue, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
You voted no?
Yes, I did.
Okay, I was testing
I
you.
was one of those. The ATL board has a lot of convincing to do on its massive transit plan that includes the Clifton Corridor, model expansion, and Gwinnett, a major rail line, and the commuter rail line in Clayton County. The big question is, where will all the money come to pay for all of these projects? 2 issues here. One is that these are long-term projects and drivers want the relief now, and they're really expensive. So what about this PR campaign, and how do they get this approved?
Phil, you want to weigh in?
Well, yes. In fact, you're making a good point. The big question is, where does all the money come from? And as we all know, we all want to be assured, how is this going to benefit me and my community and my neighborhood? Lori, you know well what happened in Gwinnett County last March. And basically, people were not satisfied with half of Gwinnett County, in my opinion, wasn't going to be benefited by a very expensive, heavy rail line. You know, just remember, heavy rail is very expensive. And so there are some good things, the Clifton Corridor, but again, it goes back to your point, PR. People have to be convinced that this is going to be beneficial. And also, you don't want to hear about something 10 years later. You want something now for congestion relief.
But Kathy, I mean, I think Michael Thurman made a really good point that this is visionary. I mean, if we don't start now, think about 10 years from now and the traffic. If we would have started 10 years ago, think about the relief we could have had.
Well, here's the problem. Nobody's using any kind of analytics to decide what should be on this project list and how it works. The lists are all political. There's going to be a real uphill climb to convince voters in DeKalb County that they want to put all their money into the Clifton Corridor project that won't happen for 20 years and cost more than you can possibly imagine. That's what happened to voters in Atlanta. We voted on a different project list, and then all of the money is being held for the next 10 to 15 years to provide a match. People are going to look at that and think twice about saying, yeah, we're going to put more money into the pot. There's plenty of money there, but somebody needs to come up with an objective plan that's really moving people to where they want to get to go, and that's not happening.
Corey, how do they do that?
No, I agree. I mean, I think what's lost in the conversation about mass transit in Atlanta is our cultural aversion to mass transit. So getting people to ride and getting people to take bikes or to walk. My brother moved here from New York, and he lived near a MARTA's line, and he rode everywhere. So it can happen. We just have to not only have the vision, but also have the follow-throughs.
Change the culture, right?
Right. Right. Well, coming up, the water war between Georgia and Florida finds its way to New Mexico. We'll explain straight ahead.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
The U.S. Supreme Court appointed a judge in New Mexico to make recommendations in the latest water war between Florida and Georgia. Alabama is sitting this round out. Now, this one could really impact Georgia farmers near the Flint River Basin, Phil.
Well, absolutely. There's a couple things to point out. I'm upset with the U.S. Supreme Court. We should have done this the last time with the last special master. Now we've got a new special master. The last special master was actually very sympathetic to Georgia's argument in this long-running dispute. And not just the Flint River Basin, but if Georgia loses, this would devastate our state. We thought that Hurricane Michael devastated our state. I'm not over-dramatizing this. You can talk to the experts on that. I think our arguments are still as powerful as they were when the other special master was very sympathetic to us. I'm remaining very optimistic, but it is a shame that we have to spend all this money that the lawyers get in court. But hopefully we will win, because Florida really has some bogus statistics and lack of documentation.
Well, it'll be interesting, too, to see how the new administration handles the water wars, because we saw under former Governor Perdue, former Governor Deal, and now we have Governor Kemp. So we'll be watching.
And all the others, the Florida and Alabama both had Republican governors too, and they still couldn't work it out.
Right,
right. Not good.
Well, the AJC reports a senior living community got a $4 million tax break in exchange for providing 10% of its units as affordable housing. Now, the Holbrook is charging $3,200 for its cheapest unit. Now, is there any enforcement here, and who sets the affordability amount? Could the county go after Holbrook and then collect those tax dollars if they don't hold up their end of the bargain? Because, Kathy, this is a bigger issue. I mean, how do you hold these places accountable when they make these deals and get these tax breaks?
Well, I think obviously the devil's in the detail, and what gets written into the contracts is important. There should be a clawback on every single tax break. If the terms and conditions aren't met, there should be a way to recoup the money. And right now, too many of these things are happening behind closed doors. They're sort of just, kind of getting out there, and nobody really knows what's going on. And then you see it. And we've seen in Atlanta where Fulton County has been giving tax breaks to projects in Atlanta in places where Atlanta doesn't want to necessarily see, tax breaks happening. So, folks have got to get a lot more clear about what the objectives are and name them. And if the companies that are coming for the tax breaks don't accept the terms, then fine. You don't have to beg them. Developing a piece of property on Claremont Road in DeKalb County is not a hard thing to make successful.
And Alexis, when the issue of affordable housing is so important now, when we see the rates of rents and everything going up all over Metro Atlanta, I mean, how do you hold these developers accountable to what they've promised?
Well, I think just as Kathy pointed out, there need to be something very clearly stated in the agreement that if they do not do this, then they have to pay. They have to return the funds that lose the tax break. And I don't know how you can make it any clearer than that.
Yeah, the news stories didn't really indicate what the contract said.
Right.
And I think we all need to go back and look at the contract. And if it was just a handshake deal or verbal, too bad. Now, one of the problems too is these developers are really being pressured to do this. It's not really in the interest of a lot of these developers to do this. I can understand how this would happen if there's no concrete guarantees.
Right. All right, well, some Midtown Atlanta residents say that they are fed up with crime and held a meeting with Atlanta's police chief.
When you have a case that's important to you or your neighborhood, you go before the judge. Because the judge, by seeing you there, you serve as a behavior modifier.
She's not happy. There's been an uptick in the area and a lot of repeat offenders who are getting out of jail. This sounds very familiar, Kathy.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a broken record. This has been going on for decades. Unfortunately, it is important that neighbors have to go to court and advocate for themselves. That shouldn't be the case. It should be enough that the police are bringing these cases and the charges, and the judges are understanding the impact of what they're doing. But with the prevalence of guns and young people not knowing the consequences of what they're doing when they're out there, it's scary for people. And you only have to have your neighborhood violated one time for people to be really ill at ease.
And Corey, we see this playing out in Buckhead as well, and in Southwest Atlanta, Southeast Atlanta.
All over.
A lot of the blame that the chief was putting on the judges for letting these repeat offenders out.
Yeah, I mean, there needs to be some tweaks to criminal justice reform. I spoke with District Attorney Paul Howard about that. I think criminal justice reform is a good thing. I think we just need to make sure we tweak the definitions of violent versus nonviolent crimes. The other thing is we need to embark on long-term solutions like early child education. We know that this works to decrease criminal involvement in young people, and it's just not something that I see any of the leaders in Atlanta talking about with any seriousness.
Well, and then the other factor, and you see this in judicial races, and you're going to have some judicial races in May of 2020, is these permissive judges that it's a revolving door. The magistrates, as we've pointed out, the police have pointed out, have been very permissive in Fulton County, for example. Judge Doris Downs, I'm glad she's gone. She let out violent criminals. And so I think we all know what we need to do here, but it's just getting it done.
And the gang problem, too.
The gang problem is horrible here.
It is. All right, well, coming up, we will have winners and losers. Stay tuned, everyone.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Corey Ruth, you were brave enough to come back for a second week to fill in for Janelle, so you can go first.
Well, thanks for having me. I would say my winner today is Governor Brian Kemp. Last week was his birthday, so happy belated birthday. And also I want to applaud him for his, I think, courage-based approach to address at least the beginning steps of health care, something that a lot of states haven't done and certainly is not being done at the federal level. My loser is the Falcons. And as we tape, they play on Sunday against the Saints, and so we're rooting for them to win, and I'm hoping that they can turn the rest of the season around. So.
Phil.
Well, my winner is President Donald Trump, and you won't read this in the liberal Atlanta paper, but here was the headline a couple of weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal, a more credible paper. U.S. jobless rate hits 50-year low. And, I wish the AJC would ever put that on their front page. But this is where a lot of folks, I don't care your race or color or political ideology, you ought to love this, and that's going to help him get reelected, in my opinion. It's also Veterans Day Monday. That is a winner. I'm a veteran myself. I appreciate all of our veterans and their service to the country.
Absolutely. And Kathy?
Winner is Alicia Phillip. She's retiring after 40 years at the helm of the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta. She's done a great job. Everybody gets deserves to get the chance to travel and have some fun, and I'm sure that she's got big plans for that.
Yes, what a run.
Yep, and losers, Georgians seeking health care. That plan isn't going to do it for them.
All right, Alexis.
Okay, I'm going to congratulate the Russell family. Michael, Jerome, and Donata celebrated 60th anniversary of the company this past week, and they had a big luncheon and tour of some of the iconic buildings that they had a hand in. Like 191 and Mercedes-Benz Stadium were lit up in green lights in tribute to them on Tuesday night, which was really wonderful. And do I have time to do any more?
One more. How about that?
2 halls of fame this week, one for the Atlanta Convention and Visitors Bureau and one for the Atlanta Press Club. So I'll save them for next week because there's 4 in each hall of fame.
Okay.
So we'll congratulate them next week.
That's great.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, I have one, Mary Frances Bowley. She's the founder and executive director of Wellspring Living, which helps victims of sex trafficking. And Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms awarded her the Phoenix Award, which is the city's highest honor. And Wells Fargo donated $200,000 to the nonprofit. So congratulations to her and all of the work that she does to help ladies and the women there. So, and thank you all for joining us, and we will see you again next week. Bye-bye.
The opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the panelists appearing in this program.